Here's a contradiction that shouldn't exist. The film Martin Scorsese has called the single scariest movie ever made, and that Steven Spielberg reportedly called the scariest film ever made too, contains no ghost, no monster, no blood. Nothing supernatural is ever shown on screen, not once. And it was directed by the same gentle, unflappable man who 2 years later would make the most beloved family musical in Hollywood history. This is The Haunting, released in 1963, directed by Robert Wise, adapted from Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, and starring Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, and Russ Tamblyn for MGM. It's the story of a paranormal investigator who invites three strangers to spend nights in a house that may be alive, may be malevolent, and may be slowly devouring the most fragile mind among them. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about The Haunting, and stick around for number one, because the secret to why this film still frightens people is that there is, quite literally, nothing there. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. Is this the scariest film ever made, or does something more modern get you? Make your case below. Alright, Hill House is waiting. Let's get into it. Sit with the whiplash of this for a moment. The man who directed The Haunting, this cold, dread-soaked, psychologically punishing ghost story that some of the greatest filmmakers alive consider the scariest film ever made, was Robert Wise. And The Haunting sits in his filmography directly between two of the sunniest, most beloved movie musicals in the history of cinema. He made West Side Story in 1961. He made The Sound of Music in 1965. And in the gap between them, no, almost as a palate cleanser, he made the film that gives people nightmares. Wise was a definition of a versatile studio craftsman, a director who could move between genres with a technical command that made each one look effortless. But the specific juxtaposition here is genuinely staggering. The same instincts, the same eye, the same calm professionalism that gave the world Singing Nuns and the Von Trapp children climbing every mountain also produced a haunted house that has frightened audiences for over 60 years. Scorsese put The Haunting at the very top of his list of the scariest films ever made. Spielberg called it seminal. And the man responsible spent the very next chapter of his career teaching children that the hills were alive. The hills were alive. So, it turns out, was Hill House. The reason The Haunting shows you nothing isn't an accident or a budget limitation. It's a philosophy, and Robert Wise learned it directly from a master. Early in his career at RKO, Wise worked under the legendary low-budget horror producer Val Lewton, directing films for him including The Curse of the Cat People and The Body Snatcher. Lewton had built an entire approach to horror around a single radical idea: that what you don't show is infinitely more frightening than what you do. Forced to work with almost no money, Lewton turned suggestion itself into the monster. Lewton once put it in terms that could serve as the entire thesis of The Haunting: if you make the screen dark enough, the audience's own mind will read anything they fear into that darkness. The terror isn't on the screen. The terror is in the viewer, and the filmmaker's job is simply to open the door and let it out. Wise absorbed this lesson completely, and decades later he applied it with total discipline to Hill House. Every moan behind a wall, every shadow, every shot that lingers on a closed door is an invitation for your imagination to supply something far worse than any effects department could build. Wise didn't make a scary house. He made a screen dark enough for you to haunt it yourself. When it came time to find the exterior for Hill House, Robert Wise didn't simply scout locations the usual way. According to actor Russ Tamblyn, Wise approached an actual organization, a society in Britain that kept records of supposedly haunted houses around the country, and asked them for a list. A real registry of real allegedly haunted buildings became the casting call for the most famous fictional haunted house in film history. Wise sent his production designer, Elliot Scott, around the country to inspect the candidates, and personally selected Eddington Park, a centuries-old manor in Warwickshire. The choice worked a little too well. Eddington Park has its own genuine reputation for strangeness, and when actresses Julie Harris and Claire Bloom first arrived at the location, they were unsettled before a single frame was shot. They found the place authentically frightening to look at, creepy in a way that had nothing to do with the script, and Wise had to actively reassure them that everything was fine. Think about the layers here. To build a fictional, haunted house, the director went looking through a directory of real ones, picked the one that scared his own actors on site, and then pointed a camera at it. The dread radiating off Hill House in those exterior shots isn't entirely manufactured. The building was already doing the work before anyone yelled action. One of the most effective and least appreciated tricks Wise used to generate genuine fear involves the film's soundtrack of terror. The booming, pounding, breathing, moaning noises that torment the characters in the night. Wise didn't add all of those sounds in post-production the way a normal film would. He had them played out loud, live, on the set while the actors were performing. The cast was reacting to noise they could actually hear filling the soundstage around them in real time as the cameras rolled. This is a small decision with an enormous payoff. When you watch Julie Harris and Claire Bloom clutch each other in bed, rigid with terror as something enormous batters its way down the hallway toward them. The fear tightening their faces is being fed by an actual wall of sound engulfing them on set. Their startled flinches are real startles. Their dread is being generated, not purely summoned from imagination. It's a technique that erases the gap between performance and genuine reaction, and it's a large part of why the night sequences feel so unbearably authentic. The actors weren't pretending to hear something in the dark. They were hearing it. Wise simply made sure the microphone caught their faces while they did. Most film directors, especially in 1963, wanted clean, clear, sequential dialogue. One actor finishes a line, the next begins, every word legible. Robert Wise deliberately broke that rule on The Haunting. He encouraged his actors to step on each other's lines, to overlap, to interrupt, to let their dialogue collide the way real conversation does when people are frightened, tense, and increasingly at each other's throats. The result is a verbal texture far ahead of its time, a naturalism that wouldn't become common in American film for years. The effect serves the horror in a way that's easy to miss but powerful in practice. The overlapping dialogue cranks up the sense of friction and unease between the four characters, making their little group feel genuinely unstable, genuinely on edge, fraying in real time as Hill House works on their nerves. It also heightens the claustrophobia. When everyone is talking over everyone, the conversations feel airless and trapped, mirroring the way the house itself closes in around them. Wise understood that a haunted house film isn't only about the house, it's about what the house does to the people inside it, how it turns allies into irritants and quiet into menace. Letting the cast talk over each other was a tiny technical choice that made the human tension as suffocating as the supernatural one. There's a celebrated camera movement in The Haunting that has fascinated film students for decades. A shot that travels smoothly up the inside of the mansion's tall spiral staircase, gliding upward along the banister as if floating. People have long wondered how Wise achieved such a fluid, vertical move in 1963 with the heavy camera equipment of the era. The answer is gloriously simple, and it's the opposite of what your eyes tell you. The shot wasn't filmed going up, it was filmed going down and then reversed. Wise and his team designed the staircase's banister to be unusually wide and thick, wide enough to lay a small set of tracks along it and mount a little wheeled dolly carrying a handheld camera. They placed the camera at the top, attached a control wire running all the way down, started it rolling, and simply let it travel down the balustrade to the bottom. Then they reversed the film in editing, so the descent became an ascent. The eerie, impossible, gravity-defying glide up the staircase is just a camera rolling downhill, played in rewind. It's the entire ethos of the film in one trick. There's no magic, no expensive rig, no supernatural force. There's a clever man, a thick railing, and a piece of film run backwards, and it looks like the house itself is breathing you upward. One of the most genuinely terrifying moments in The Haunting, a sequence routinely cited as among the scariest in any film, is when a heavy wooden door begins to bulge and buckle inward, swelling as though something monstrous on the other side is pressing against it, breathing, alive. Audiences have spent 60 years wondering how that horrifying organic effect was created. The answer, once again, is almost insultingly low-tech. The door was made of laminated wood, layers of wood bonded together so it could flex without snapping, and the force pushing against it was a strong prop man on the other side, shoving it with his hands. That's the whole effect. No mechanism, no special effects rig, no hidden hydraulics. One sturdy crew member pressing his weight into a specially built flexible door, making it bow inward as if the house were inhaling. Wise himself noted, with evident delight, that this simple trick scared the audience senseless. It's the purest demonstration of the film's entire approach. The thing on the other side of that door is the most frightening monster in the movie precisely because it is never shown and never explained. And the reason it's never shown is that there was nothing to show. It was a man. Your imagination built the rest, which is exactly what Wise was counting on. Not all of the fear on screen in The Haunting was a trick of suggestion. The film's climactic set piece involves a rickety iron spiral staircase in the library that sways, buckles, and threatens to tear away from the wall while a character is stranded near the top. The staircase the production built to film this actually moved. It rocked and swayed alarmingly when someone was up on it, and the cast was genuinely disturbed by it. The instability wasn't entirely performed. Standing on that thing was authentically unnerving. Robert Wise, ever the calm professional, tried to reassure his nervous actors the most direct way he could. He climbed the swaying staircase himself, demonstrating that it was safe before asking them to do the same. It's a small detail that says everything about how this film blurred the line between real fear and acted fear. Again and again, Wise found ways to make the terror authentic at the source, playing the haunting noises aloud, building a door that really bulged, constructing a staircase that really swayed, so that what the camera captured wasn't simply skilled acting, but real human nerves responding to real physical unease. The actors were scared because Wise kept building things that were actually a little scary. Then he just made sure the lens was pointed at their faces. If you're realizing the scariest film ever made was basically built out of sound effects and a guy pushing a door, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment. Does practical, suggestion-based horror like this scare you more than modern gore or less? Make your case below. Now, back into the house. Julie Harris plays Eleanor, the fragile, lonely woman whom Hill House slowly claims as its own. And the haunted, isolated quality she brings to the role was not entirely invented. Harris was a committed method actress, and she deliberately kept herself apart from the rest of the cast to inhabit Eleanor's outsider status. But it went deeper than technique. Harris was suffering from depression during the filming, a genuine darkness that she carried onto the set every day, and her isolation became real rather than performed. The other actors noticed. Claire Bloom said in interviews that Harris simply wouldn't speak to her. Russ Tamblyn found her aloof. The rest of the cast, Bloom, Tamblyn, and Richard Johnson, would spend their breaks together, having dinner, building the easy camaraderie of a small ensemble, while Harris rarely joined them. They came to believe her separateness was self-imposed, and it was, but it was also fed by a real unhappiness she was privately battling. The tragic result is that Eleanor's profound loneliness, her aching desire to belong somewhere, and her failure to do so, is partly Julie Harris's actual emotional state bleeding through the performance. The most heartbreaking thing about the film's central character is that the actress wasn't only acting it. This is the detail that makes Julie Harris's isolation almost unbearably poignant. By the strange coincidence of Hollywood scheduling, nearly the entire principal cast and the director of The Haunting had already met and worked together before this production. They arrived as something close to a pre-existing group with established relationship and easy familiarity. Every key person, that is, except one. Julie Harris was the only newcomer, the only one who walked onto the production without prior bonds to the people around her. The parallel to the film itself is almost too perfect to be real. Eleanor Vance is the outsider of the group, the one who desperately wants to be accepted, to belong, to finally be part of something, and who is, in the end, singled out and consumed precisely because she never quite fits in. And the actress playing her was, in actual fact, the outsider of the real-life group, the one person who hadn't been there before, isolated from a cast that already knew each other. Life and fiction collapse into the same shape. Harris later said she wished she could go back and play Eleanor differently, odder, stranger. But the raw, exposed loneliness she captured came from a place no acting choice could have manufactured. She was Eleanor because on that set, she actually was the one left out. In 1963, the Hollywood Production Code still strictly forbade the explicit depiction of homosexuality on screen. The Haunting features Theodora, played by Claire Bloom, a chic, confident, openly sensual woman whose attraction to Eleanor runs through the entire film. Theo is one of cinema's clearest queer-coded characters from the era, and that was entirely intentional. Claire Bloom has said she took the role specifically because she was interested in playing a gay character, and to sharpen Theo's bohemian, modern image, the production hired the famous mod fashion designer Mary Quant to create her wardrobe. The censors pushed back. They insisted that Theo could never be shown physically touching Eleanor, hoping to blunt the implication. The filmmakers essentially ignored this. There are multiple scenes where Theo touches Eleanor, including one where she holds her tenderly to comfort her. Wise also shot, then cut, an opening scene that would have made Theo's sexuality explicit. Bloom's character angrily scrawling, "I hate you," in lipstick on a mirror after a fight with a female lover. Wise removed it, deciding it labeled things too heavily and that the subtext worked better left as subtext. Decades later, he spoke plainly about it, acknowledging that Bloom's character is a lesbian and that the film had always intended her to be. They told a forbidden love story in 1963 by simply trusting the audience to understand what they weren't allowed to say out loud. Hill House, in Shirley Jackson's story and in the film, sits in New England, the American Northeast, all isolation and old Yankee dread. But almost none of The Haunting was filmed anywhere near New England. The entire production was based in Britain. The interiors were built and shot at the MGM British Studios in Boreham Wood, just outside London, and the exteriors were at Warwickshire Manor, standing in for an American mansion. The quintessentially American haunted house is, top to bottom, a British production wearing a New England disguise. The reason was financial and bureaucratic. Britain had a system called the Eady Levy, which provided financial incentives for films made with British participation, and qualifying meant the cast had to be partly British. That requirement directly shaped the movie. It's part of why Claire Bloom and Richard Johnson, both British, were cast in 2 of the 4 lead roles. So a story set in the American countryside, adapted from an American novel by an American author, was filmed across an ocean with a partly British cast to satisfy a British tax incentive, and you would never know it from watching. Eagle-eyed fans can spot another British fingerprint in the cast. A small role is played by Lois Maxwell, who that same era became globally famous as Miss Moneypenny in the James Bond films. New England never looked so thoroughly English. The film is not called The Haunting of Hill House, like the novel it's based on. It's called simply The Haunting, and that shortened title came from the original author herself. When the production changed the name, Shirley Jackson approved of the change, and according to the film's history, she personally suggested The Haunting as the alternative. The woman who wrote one of the greatest horror novels in the English language handed the movie its leaner, eerier title. There's a deeper authorial fingerprint on the film too, rooted in a fascinating disagreement about what the story even is. When screenwriter Nelson Gidding first read Jackson's novel, he became convinced it wasn't really a ghost story at all, that it was about a woman's psychological breakdown, with the haunting existing largely in Eleanor's disintegrating mind. He went and met Jackson to discuss it, and she told him directly that no, the novel was very much meant to be supernatural. The haunting was real, but Gidding, intrigued by his own interpretation, kept elements of the mental breakdown reading in the screenplay anyway, weaving Eleanor's possible madness through the supernatural event so that neither explanation ever fully wins. That tension, is the house haunted or is Eleanor simply losing her mind, is precisely what gives the film its unbearable ambiguity. Watch it once, and the house is clearly alive and malevolent. Watch it again, paying attention to Eleanor's narration and her unraveling, and a second film appears, one where a fragile woman talks herself into destruction inside an ordinary old building. The screenwriter and the author genuinely disagreed about the answer, and the film deliberately refuses to settle it. Most horror films want to confirm their monster. The Haunting leaves you arguing with yourself, which is exactly why it never quite lets go. The Haunting was shot in austere, atmospheric black and white, a deliberate choice by Wise, who loved the depth and moody richness that monochrome gave the story. That choice was nearly undone decades later. In 1990, media mogul Ted Turner launched a controversial initiative to colorize classic black and white films for his cable networks, believing color would make them more palatable to modern audiences. It was one of the most fiercely debated decisions in Hollywood preservation history, and The Haunting was on Turner's list to be colorized. Robert Wise found out almost by accident. As a member of the Directors Guild, touring Turner's colorization facilities, Wise learned that his own film was slated for the treatment. He fought it, and he had a weapon. Wise pointed to his original contract for The Haunting, which contained a clause specifying that the picture could only ever be exhibited in black and white. The contract held, the colorization was stopped, and the film was preserved in the stark monochrome that is fundamental to its power. It's a small miracle of foresight. A director who cared enough about his black and white horror film back in 1963 to write its protection into the paperwork, saving it decades later from being washed in artificial color by a man who thought he was doing audiences a favor. Here is a secret that ties every other fact together, and it's the thing that should make you want to watch the whole film again immediately. The Haunting, the movie Scorsese ranks as the scariest ever made, the one Spielberg called the scariest film ever made, contains no ghost. It contains no monster, no apparition, no creature, no gore, not one drop of blood, and not a single visible supernatural entity from beginning to end. The most frightening haunted house film in cinema history shows you literally nothing to be afraid of. Every scare you remember is an illusion built from almost nothing. The thing battering down the hallway is a sound played on set. The door breathing inward is a prop man's hand. The impossible glide up the staircase is a camera rolling downhill in reverse. The swaying staircase is just an unstable prop. The dread is lighting, shadow, camera angles, overlapping voices, and the terrified faces of actors who were genuinely unnerved. There is no spectacle here, no expensive effect, nothing for the eye to actually catch and dismiss. And that is precisely why it works. Wise understood the lesson Val Lewton taught him decades earlier. The scariest thing a film can show you is a dark space where something might be. Your own mind rushes in to fill it, and your mind always builds something worse than any studio could. The haunting terrifies you with an empty room and lets you do the haunting. 60 years later, no amount of digital monsters has ever managed to be scarier than that nothing. So there you have it. 15 weird facts about the scariest film ever made, a black and white ghost story with no ghost, directed by the man who'd make The Sound of Music 2 years later, built from a backwards camera shot, a man pushing a door, and sounds blasted live on set. Wise scared the world with an empty house and the contents of its own imagination. He found his haunted mansion in a registry of real ones, hid a forbidden love story in plain sight, and kept his film in black and white forever. They never showed you the monster. They never had to.